On my 63rd birthday, just when I thought I'd grown used to silence, a box appeared on my doorstep. No note, just a single blue ribbon and handwriting I hadn't seen in 3 years, but would recognize anywhere. My son's. Inside cookies. Beautiful. Meticulously made. Too perfect to eat. And maybe that's the only reason I'm still alive to tell this story. Before we continue, tell me, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if this story already has you holding your breath, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me. Because of what happened next, I never saw it coming. No balloons, no candles, no laughter bouncing off the walls. Just me. A cup of black coffee, the crossword puzzle I only half care about, and the porch swing groaning under the weight of habit more than body. That morning was pale and gray, the kind that doesn't bother to decide if it wants to be warm or cold. July 17th, my birthday. But you wouldn't know it from the silence. No calls, no messages. Just the click of the refrigerator door and the faint buzz of the old air conditioner rattling in protest from the window. The lawn stretched in front of me like it always did, patchy and stubborn, refusing to stay green no matter how much water or willpower I poured into it. Some days I think it mirrors me. I used to mind birthdays. I used to crave the acknowledgement, the small tokens of memory that said, "We're still connected." But over time, you learn to sit quietly with the silence. It doesn't sting as much if you don't lean into it. That was before the knock. Just one. Not the double rap of the UPS guy or the frantic tapping of neighbor kids selling magazine drives. One clean knock. And then nothing. No voice, no footsteps lingering. Only the sound of retreating presence. When I opened the door, I found a plain brown package resting neatly on the welcome mat like it had rehearsed its entrance. It wasn't the box that stopped me in my tracks. It was the ribbon, a single thin strip of blue satin tied exactly once around the middle. Not a bow, not a flourish, just enough to say someone had thought about it, and that someone was unmistakable. Ezra. I hadn't seen his handwriting in 3 years, but I could have recognized it in the dark. He wrote like an engineer, each letter, uniform sharp, no wasted curves, always in blue ink, always straight as a ruler, like he didn't trust his own words unless they stood at attention. The name written across the top, Marlene Greaves, was so perfectly familiar it made my knees buckle. I whispered it to myself like a spell, trying to hear it as he might have said it, trying to find warmth in a name that had gone unused in his voice for far too long. I didn't open the box right away. I just brought it inside barefoot, the cold tile waking up nerves I hadn't felt in a while. It sat on the kitchen table while I reheated the coffee. I folded my hands in my lap like I was waiting for a verdict. 3 years. 3 years since my son stopped speaking to me. Not a card when I had pneumonia. Not a call when my sister died. Not even a text when the dog passed. Just silence. Thick, unyielding. A wall with no door. And now this. I told myself not to read into it, but of course I did. Curiosity eventually outweighed caution. Inside the wrapping was a smaller white box, delicate, the kind you'd expect to hold jewelry or old letters. I lifted the lid with both hands like it might be heavy with ghosts. Cookies, dozens of them. Each one was decorated by hand with blue flowers, golden leaves, and sugar-dusted stars. Not store-bought, not rushed. Someone had taken time, care. But Ezra had never baked, not even as a child, not even once. There was only one thing inside the box, aside from the cookies, a small card taped to the lid. "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." That ache behind my eyes came fast and quiet. Not a full cry, just that swelling pressure when something old and long-buried stirs. I held the card for a long time, read the words again and again. Let's start over. But what did that mean? Did it mean he forgave me for something I still didn't understand? Or was it a test to see if I'd respond, if I'd reach back toward the olive branch? I don't know why I didn't eat them. I wanted to. God knows I did. But there was something in me, maybe pride, maybe pain, maybe instinct that held me still. Instead, I opened the Tupperware cabinet and pulled out a small square container, slipped one cookie inside, sealed it, and slid it into the fridge like a secret. The rest I wrapped up just as carefully as I had found them. I thought about Ruth Langford, Ezra's mother-in-law. She lived just 15 minutes away in a tidy yellow house with wind chimes on the porch and a lifetime's worth of casseroles under her belt. She had always been kind to me, especially when Ezra wasn't. I thought maybe she'd appreciate them more than I could, so I drove them over. The sun was hanging low, casting everything in that soft orange glow that makes even power lines look poetic. Ruth greeted me in a sweater too heavy for the weather. She always ran cold. I handed her the box and brushed off her protests with a practiced smile. It's nothing, I said. But it wasn't. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of my kitchen, staring at the table where the package had been, and I told myself it was good that it was gone, that I had done the mature thing, the safe thing. But something inside me, deep and barely formed, wondered if I had just dodged something I didn't even know was coming. I didn't sleep well that night. It wasn't that anything was wrong, not exactly. The house didn't creak more than usual. No dreams clawed their way into consciousness. But I kept waking every hour or so, like my body was standing guard over something it couldn't name. My mind kept returning to the cookies, or more precisely, the cookie. The one I had tucked away like a question I wasn't ready to ask. I opened the fridge around midnight, not to eat, just to look. The container sat on the top shelf, sealed tightly, resting beside a jar of pickles and last week's half-finished soup. I stared at it like it might explain itself. Why only one? Because one was enough to remember it by, because I couldn't bear the idea of having none. Or maybe I didn't admit it then, because something deep in me didn't trust the gift to begin with. Ezra had never been the sentimental type. As a child, he was brilliant, quiet, composed, too composed. He didn't throw tantrums or break things when angry. He withdrew. He observed. Even as a toddler, he had a strange seriousness to him. He could line up his toy cars by size, by color, by manufacturer. No one ever taught him that. He did it on his own. By the time he was 5, he was correcting his preschool teacher's spelling. By 10, he'd memorized the chemical table, not because anyone asked him to, but because he thought it was inefficient to keep looking it up. I used to laugh and call him my little scientist. He didn't laugh back. He liked things a certain way, specific brands, specific colors. He hated surprises and detested them. I learned that the hard way after I rearranged the pantry one spring trying to make it prettier. Ezra didn't speak to me for days. Back then I called them quirks. Now I wonder if that was just my way of keeping the unease from settling too deeply. There was a moment when he was about 12. I made cookies from scratch one Sunday. It wasn't often that I baked. I was tired working 2 jobs, and he never showed much interest in sweets. But I thought maybe it would be a gesture, a small kindness. I used walnuts. I forgot he didn't like them. He took one bite, spit it into the trash can, and then without saying a word walked to the bathroom and scrubbed his mouth until his lips turned red, not from allergy, from disgust. I remember standing in the kitchen holding the tray, the warmth from the oven still on my face, and feeling something break inside me. He didn't apologize. He never did. That story played itself over in my mind as I stared at the ribbon he'd used to seal the box. I had kept it, smoothed it out, and slipped it into the drawer beside my reading glasses. It was just fabric, but it felt like it had been tied with more than just fingers. There was no return address on the package, no note besides that one line, "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." But the message didn't sound like Ezra. It sounded like something someone trying to sound like Ezra might write. When I gave the cookies to Ruth, I didn't feel guilty. Not then. I told myself it was a kindness. She'd always liked sweets. She'd never taken sides. When Ezra and I stopped talking, she was the one who still sent cards at Christmas. She even brought soup when I had the flu the winter after the silence began. Some part of me thought maybe the cookies weren't really meant for me. Maybe they were a peace offering meant to be passed along. But if I'm honest, there was another reason. Fear. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with music or flashing lights. It was quieter than that. A soft tightening in the chest, a sense that the gesture didn't fit the giver. Ezra doesn't bake. Ezra doesn't wrap things with ribbons. Ezra doesn't use words like "let's start over." And Ezra doesn't forget. Even as a little boy, he stored things, slight offenses, missed appointments, the wrong brand of ketchup. He'd log them away like data points, and months, sometimes years later, he'd bring them up with chilling precision. He remembered everything, but never out loud. It simmered underneath. I never understood what made him that way. His father was absent, yes, but not cruel, just gone more than present. Maybe that's where it started. Or maybe he was born with that hunger for control. He needed to hold the pieces in his hand until they stopped moving. I thought giving the cookies away was the safest thing I could do. I told myself that I was sparing myself a sugar headache or avoiding a late-night binge. But the truth, if I peel it back, is that I was trying to avoid a feeling, one I couldn't name, but couldn't ignore either. The phone didn't ring that night. No follow-up, no second message, and still the silence felt louder than usual. I washed dishes that didn't need washing, organized the spice rack for the third time that week, kept the TV on low volume just so the air wouldn't feel thick with memory. When I finally climbed into bed, the house felt off balance, like it was waiting. I fell asleep with the lamp on. Not because I was afraid of the dark, but because I wanted the cookie to know I could still see it. I was halfway through pouring my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. It startled me not because it was loud, but because it was early. Too early for sales calls, too early for anyone casual, the kind of hour that only brings bad news or people with nothing left to lose. When I saw the caller ID, I stopped mid-pour. Ezra. The name alone seemed out of place, like it didn't belong on my screen anymore. I stared at it long enough that the coffee overflowed, spilling onto the counter unnoticed. It rang once more, then silence. I reached for the paper towel, wiping up the mess with one hand, while my other hovered over the phone like it might burn me. When it vibrated again, I answered. Out of reflex or courage, I still don't know. Hello? There was a pause, half a breath, not long, but full of meaning. Hi, Mom. His voice hadn't changed, still smooth, still precise. But it landed differently now, like a letter addressed to an old house, like hearing your name in someone else's dream. Happy birthday, he added. A little late, I know. I sat down slowly, gripping the mug with both hands, trying to keep the tremor from showing. I got your package, I said. A soft chuckle. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't even sure you'd open it, honestly. I did, I said carefully. Another beat of silence. Then his tone shifted to too casual. So, how were they? The cookies. I inhaled, then exhaled too slowly. I didn't eat them. A pause. I gave them to Ruth. The air between us went dead quiet, not heavy, sharp, like glass cracking just beneath the surface. You gave them to Ruth. His voice wasn't angry. It was colder than that. Controlled, almost rehearsed. Yes, I said slower this time. She's always had a sweet tooth. And I trailed off. Because what could I possibly say? That I didn't trust him. That the gift felt too out of character. That I had kept one in the fridge like a relic and couldn't bring myself to taste it. He didn't speak for a moment, but I could hear him breathing. Tight, uneven. Then with growing heat, you did what? The words struck me not loudly, but pointedly. As if they weren't meant to express shock, but to deliver punishment. Ezra, what's wrong? They weren't for her, he snapped. They were for you. Only you. His voice cracked, not with grief, but something raw. Frustration. Rage. I couldn't tell. My heart was thudding now, not fast, but deep, like it was knocking on the inside of my chest, trying to say, pay attention. I didn't know, I said softly. Right, he replied, bitterness thick in his throat. Of course you didn't. You never do. Then came the click. Not dramatic, just final. He hung up. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I stared at my reflection in the black glass, mouth slightly open, hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone cold again. I didn't move. Not until the silence turned to static in my ears. Only you, he'd said. Those two words looped in my head for hours. They didn't sound like affection. They didn't sound like regret. They sounded like a rule, one I had broken. The rest of the day moved in slow motion. I tried to read but couldn't focus. Tried to clean, only made more mess. Tried to forget, failed. By sunset, I had gone back to the fridge. The container was still there, still sealed, still pristine. One perfect cookie with sugar crystals that caught the dim light like frost. I didn't open it. Instead, I stood there for a long time, hand on the door body, half bent, like I was listening for something beneath the hum of the refrigerator. That's when the other phone rang. Not the cell. The landline. The one I hadn't used in years except to receive election flyers and wrong numbers. I picked it up slowly, expecting static. Marlene. The voice was female, strained, brittle. Yes, it's Leal, Ezra's wife. A pause long enough for fear to find a foothold. "It's Ruth," she said. "She's in the hospital." I sat down without realizing it. "What happened?" "She collapsed this morning. Vomiting. Disoriented. I thought it was the flu. But it got worse. She couldn't stand. She was confused. They took her to the ER. The doctors are running tests, but—" Her voice trailed off. I could hear the beeping of monitors in the background, the squeak of rubber soles, the low murmur of other lives unraveling behind thin curtains. "Did she eat anything unusual?" I asked. A pause. "Too long. She mentioned cookies," Leal finally said. "Said you brought them over yesterday." I closed my eyes. I did. No response. "Do you think she said so quietly I almost missed it? They could have made her sick." "I don't know," I whispered. I didn't eat any myself. She didn't press. But the question hung there unspoken and pulsing. If Ruth had eaten them and I hadn't, then who were they really for? That night I couldn't sit still. I wandered the house like a woman looking for a reason to feel safe again. Wiped down counters that weren't dirty, rearranged folded towels in the linen closet, touched doorknobs just to feel something solid. Outside, the wind picked up. Chimes clinked on the porch like someone trying to say something without words. I opened the fridge again, not to eat, just to check. The cookie was still there, intact, centered in its container, like it had been posed for a photo, like it was waiting. I stared at it long enough for doubt to return. Was I being dramatic? Was I chasing ghosts because silence leaves too much space? I closed the fridge and turned to take out the trash. Just a chore, something to do with my hands. The bin gave a soft suction sound when I pulled the bag loose. I tied it up, then paused. Something had shifted near the bottom, something light, hard plastic against the soft rustle of eggshells and tea bags. I reached in. Not because I was looking for anything, but because something told me I should be. It was a small, clear plastic bottle, the kind that usually holds vitamins or over-the-counter pills. But this one had no label, no branding, no faded dosage sticker from the pharmacy. Inside, there was only a faint dusting of white powder along the inner wall, like it had once held something measured precise, and now didn't. It wasn't mine. I held it between my fingers, turning it toward the light above the stove. The residue was barely visible, but it was there. And the cap had been screwed on tight. Not tossed. Not loose. Sealed. I had lived alone for 5 years. Every drawer in this house I knew. Every corner of every shelf. This wasn't something I had forgotten. I set the bottle on the counter and stared at it. Then slowly I walked back to the fridge, opened the door, took out the cookie. It sat in my hand like a relic. Pretty. Harmless. But suddenly so much heavier than its weight could explain. I didn't remember why I saved it. Maybe I just wanted to believe. Maybe I thought deep down that Ezra's gesture had meant something. It was a step toward repair. That we could still find our way back to the version of ourselves we liked better. But now, holding the cookie in one hand, the bottle in the other, I felt something else. Cold. Not from the fridge, from the kind of knowing you try not to say out loud. I carried both into the study, set them gently on the desk, turned on the lamp. The sugar crystals on the cookie sparkled under the light, like a trick, like a trap, like beauty hiding something it didn't want you to question. Was I the target? Or was Ruth just unlucky? I sat there for a long time, hands folded, back straight. The house around me felt like it was listening. That's when I remembered Janelle Maroro. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but she owed me a favor. Once long ago, when her sister needed a place to stay, I had given up my guest room for 2 months. She had cried when they left, thanked me for giving her family a landing pad. She worked in a private lab just outside town. Discreet, off the radar. Not the kind of place that reported things automatically unless you asked them to. I picked up the phone. It was nearly 10. She answered after 2 rings. Marlene. Her voice was groggy, but warm. "I need a favor," I said. "Something tested. Quietly." She paused. "You okay?" "I think so." I lied. "Bring it in the morning," she said without hesitation. "Early's best. We'll keep it off the books." "Thank you." We hung up. I placed the cookie back into its container and sealed it again, picked up the bottle, put both in a small lunch bag wrapped in a dish towel, set it by the door so I wouldn't forget. And then I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, not thinking, just staying. In the silence, I could still hear Ezra's voice. "You did what?" 3 words, echoing like a warning. The next morning the sky was pale and empty, the kind of light that makes even sharp edges look soft. I dressed in layers, not because it was cold, but because I felt like I needed armor. The lab was tucked behind a medical complex that looked like every other office park in the county, beige, forgettable quiet. Janelle came out to meet me in the parking lot. Her lab coat was pressed. She hadn't even had coffee yet. I handed her the bag without speaking. She opened it, glanced at the contents, and raised an eyebrow. "This is the kind of favor I'm going to regret." I tried to smile. "Just tell me what's in it." She nodded. "Give me a few hours. I didn't drive home. I couldn't. I just sat in the car, engine off, hands folded in my lap, like a schoolgirl waiting for her name to be called. And the memories came. Ezra at 8 folding napkins into precise triangles for Thanksgiving dinner. Ezra at 10 throwing away an entire lunch because I'd packed the wrong sandwich brand. Ezra at 12 silent for a full week after I wore the wrong color to his school presentation. It clashed, he'd said, as if that justified the frost. I used to call it sensitivity. Said he'd grow out of it, that he was just particular. But now the word that kept coming back to me was calculated. He didn't get loud. He never did. Ezra didn't throw fits. He filed grievances. And I had just handed a box of those grievances to Ruth. The nurse from the hospital called just before noon. Her voice was professional, brisk. I recognized that tone from years past, used it myself once when delivering hard news in soft gloves. "Ms. Greaves, I'm calling about Ruth Langford." "Yes." My voice caught in my throat. "She's still stable, but there's no improvement. Her confusion has worsened. We've escalated her case to internal medicine. They're reviewing tox panels. Has she said anything about what she ate?" "Not much. She's been drifting in and out." "Is she?" I paused, then asked the thing I didn't want to ask, in pain. A quiet pause. "She's frightened." The nurse didn't say more, but she didn't have to. I could hear it in her voice, that note of helplessness, the kind that always floats in when the body says something science hasn't yet translated. I hung up. I didn't mention the cookies. Not yet. Not until I knew more. Because once you say it out loud, you can't unsay it. And if I was wrong, I needed to be wrong quietly. I walked to the kitchen and sat with a cup of tea I didn't drink. The mug cooled in my hands as the clock hands ticked forward loud in their indifference. The phone rang again, this time Janelle. I answered before the first ring finished. "We ran the standard panels," she said, "but I had them go deeper. Something felt off." I waited, breath locked behind my ribs. "There's something in the cookie. Traces of a compound related to Aconitum napellus monkshood. The name meant nothing to me at first. It's a highly toxic plant," she said. "Rare to find in food. Not an accident. Definitely not a mix-up in the kitchen." She paused. "You said someone ate these." I couldn't answer. I swallowed hard, closed my eyes. She softened. "I'll write it up quietly. No names, unless you ask." We hung up, and still I sat there. My son had sent me poison in a birthday box. A box I had passed on like it was nothing. I tried to make sense of it, replayed it like a scene from a film, the knock, the ribbon, the note. I kept wondering, was it personal punishment? Did he think I would be the one to eat them? Or was it about control again, about proving something Ezra never shouted? He never hit walls. His rebellions were quiet, precision-based, strategic. As a child, he'd hide things when he was upset, turn in perfect schoolwork but leave off his name, lock his bedroom door not in defiance, but in silence. He once labeled all the household light switches with red tape because I moved one lamp. It wasn't rage. It was systems, patterns, punishment through logic. He didn't act. He calculated. That night I found myself pacing again. The wind outside had calmed, but inside the stillness felt charged. I opened my bedroom drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were old photographs of Ezra at 7 kneeling in the garden beside a science kit. Ezra at 13 unsmiling beside a homemade model of the solar system. Ezra at 17 shaking hands with a judge at the regional science fair, his smile thin and camera-resistant. He had always been 2 steps ahead, and I had always hoped it would be channeled into brilliance, not bitterness. What had gone wrong? Was it me? That question, old and tired, returned with claws. I had done what I could, hadn't. I raised him alone, kept the house running, put off dating vacations, and even new shoes for myself. Every paycheck was calculated. Every decision was weighed. But Ezra didn't remember the sacrifices, only the fractures. I once forgot to sign a permission slip. He didn't speak to me for a week. I didn't attend his second-year college showcase because I was hospitalized with pneumonia. He never forgave that, even when I apologized with tubes still taped to my arms. And now I was realizing something I hadn't wanted to before. Maybe this wasn't a sudden break. Maybe it was the conclusion of a long equation I refused to solve. The next morning, I met Detective Fallon Reyes. He looked younger than I expected, late 30s maybe. Calm, unhurried, with eyes that moved the way a person thinks. We met in a small room behind the police station. No windows, just beige walls, and the quiet sound of a fan that never turned off. He offered me water. I declined. My hands wouldn't stop folding the tissue I hadn't realized I brought. He didn't press. He just asked. How long had I been estranged from my son? When did the package arrive? What did I do with the contents? I told him everything. I didn't embellish. I didn't guess. I just reported, as cleanly and carefully as I could. When he asked if I believed Ezra had intended harm, I said something that surprised even me. I don't want to believe it. But the cookie had poison in it, and he sent it, and the bottle I found wasn't mine. The timing fits. He nodded, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad, but I saw the doubt behind his eyes. Not judgment, uncertainty. Because what I had wasn't a crime scene. It was a feeling. A cookie. A story too surreal to arrest. He asked if I'd be willing to submit the items as evidence. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want justice, but because I didn't want to be the one to say it first. My son tried to hurt me. But if there was any chance Ruth had nearly died because of me, because I passed along a gift meant for someone else. Yes, I said. If there's any chance he's done this before, or would again, I can't ignore that. When I left the station, the sky was starting to darken. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat with the door still open. A breeze rolled through the parking lot, lifting a few dry leaves and the corner of the note I had written and forgotten Janelle's name and number scrawled in my hand. I didn't feel brave. I felt like a mother who had just admitted something she'd spent years denying, that the boy she loved was now a man she feared. I didn't sleep that night. The hallway light stayed on, not for safety, not even for comfort, just so I wouldn't have to walk through darkness to answer the next phone call. Every creak in the walls felt louder. The refrigerator's hum felt colder. And silence had its weight now. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed with my hands in my lap, the way I used to sit during parent-teacher conferences, waiting to hear what I already knew. I was thinking about Ezra, not the man, not the voice on the phone, but the boy. He used to sit cross-legged on the floor of our living room, with encyclopedias opened in stacks around him. He read like he was decoding a threat, methodically, intensely. He loved facts, loathed feelings. I once asked him if he was happy. He was 9. He looked up and said, "Happiness is subjective, Mom. I'd rather be efficient." At the time I laughed, but now I replayed it differently. What kind of child says that, and what kind of mother doesn't push back? The next morning, I made myself get dressed. Nothing fancy, just jeans and a sweater I hadn't worn in years. Something that said, "I'm still here." Detective Reyes called just after sunrise. "We've logged the cookie and the bottle. Official chain of custody starts today." His voice was clear, focused, but I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. That quiet respect people offer when they realize they're dealing with someone who might be grieving a person still living. I thanked him and asked if there was anything else he needed. "Not yet," he said. "But if anything comes up, anything odd, anything that makes your gut tighten, call me, even if it feels small." After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen with the morning light crawling up the tile. The counters were clean, but the air felt heavy, like the house remembered something it wasn't telling me. I opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph I hadn't looked at in years. Ezra, age 6, in a Halloween costume he'd insisted on designing himself. Not a superhero, not a ghost. He went as a chemist, a lab coat, goggles, a name tag he laminated at school. He had written his formula on the back in marker NaCl plus H2O plus Eels control. Back then I thought it was cute. Now it sounded like foreshadowing. Later that day I received a voicemail from Leal. Her voice was tired even in the recording. "She's still not conscious. I'm staying here tonight. I didn't want you to worry." She didn't mention the cookies, but her silence said enough. I debated calling her back, telling her everything, but something inside me hesitated. Maybe I wanted more proof. Or maybe I was still protecting Ezra in some deeply embedded maternal way that even logic couldn't uproot. Because I was starting to realize was the real betrayal, not the cookie, not the powder, but the part of me that still wanted to believe in the little boy with encyclopedias, even as the man he'd become had wrapped danger in frosting. By evening, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in a decade. I opened the hope chest in my bedroom. Buried beneath quilts and cards and forgotten photo albums was a small tape recorder, analog, clunky, still functional. I had used it years ago to record Ezra's school orchestra performances when he played violin with an expression that seemed both bored and furious. I slipped in new batteries just in case. Then I stared at it sitting on the kitchen table beside my cold tea. I didn't know exactly what I planned to do with it, but part of me knew I had crossed some line, even if quietly. The moment you prepare for proof against your child, you're not in denial anymore. You're in survival. The next morning was quiet, almost apologetic, the kind of weather that pretends nothing happened the night before. I called the lab where Janelle worked and asked one more favor. A summary report. Clean, precise, something I could show someone if I needed to without opening 1,000 questions. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Give me until tomorrow." Then she paused. "Marlene," she said carefully, "you know this wasn't an accident, right?" "I know," I said. There was no tremor in my voice, no panic, just that old maternal resolve, the kind you use when a doctor gives you bad news and your child is watching. Because that's the thing about motherhood. It doesn't switch off when the child becomes dangerous. It doesn't withdraw when they cross the line. It just adapts, slowly, painfully. That afternoon I drove to the park where Ezra used to play. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted to see the place where he had once run freely with scraped knees and untied shoes before rules and systems had started to build walls around him. I sat on the bench where I once waited during his piano lessons. Back then I used to bring crossword puzzles. Now I brought a growing folder of uneaten truth. It was then I knew. If I didn't confront this head on, if I didn't look him in the eye and ask what I already feared, I'd always wonder. And wondering, I'd learned, was a quieter form of self-destruction. That night, I took the recorder out of the drawer and tested it. Just once. It still worked. I placed it in my coat pocket. Not for drama, not for justice, but for the version of me that still needed to hear the words spoken out loud. The version that had packed lunches, explained nightmares, and wiped tears. The version that now stood on the edge of something irreversible. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not Janelle. Not Detective Reyes. Not even Leal. Some things you need to face without witnesses, especially when they're about people you once would have stood in front of a train for. I wore the same coat I'd had for 10 winters. The tape recorder sat snug in the inner pocket, the tiny red light off for now. I'd practiced turning it on and off with one hand. Simple, clean, quiet. Ezra answered the door faster than I expected, as if he were already near it, or waiting. "Mom." His face opened with a practiced smile. Tight, polite. It didn't reach his eyes. "This is a surprise." I met his gaze steady. "I heard about Ruth. I wanted to check in, see how she's doing." He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Still at St. Luke's. Leal's with her now. They think it's some kind of virus. Complicated strain. Nothing's definitive yet." I nodded just enough to acknowledge the words, but not believe them. His house was pristine, overly so. The kind of clean that feels defensive, like it's been scrubbed for reasons other than dust. In the kitchen, everything was in place. Knives in a block. Towels are perfectly folded, spices alphabetized. Even the fruit bowl looked curated. It was a room curated by someone who needed control to feel safe. "I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more the other day," I said, keeping my voice light. "The cookies were lovely." Ezra raised an eyebrow. "Were they?" I watched his face. "I didn't try them," I admitted, but Ruth was thrilled, said the star-shaped one was her favorite. There it was, a flicker, so small you could miss it, but I didn't. His pupils dilated, his jaw tensed, not a flinch, but a microsecond of readjustment. He smiled again, slower this time. Ruth picked the stars. I hadn't said which shape she liked, just that she had a favorite. "Yes," I said carefully. "She mentioned it." He turned toward the sink, rinsing a glass that didn't need rinsing. "She always did love pretty things," he said, more concerned with aesthetics than what's underneath. I leaned against the counter. The recorder in my coat had been on since I stepped inside. "You never told me you'd started baking," I said. He laughed. Light, but off-key. New hobby. Good way to unwind. I watched him for a moment, then asked, "Where'd you learn to use monk's hood?" The glass slipped slightly in his grip, just enough that the sound of it hitting the porcelain sink cracked the air. Not shattered, just stopped time. He didn't look at me. "I don't know what that is," he said too quickly. "Dr. Mororo does," I replied. Calm, gentle. He turned around slowly, held the glass loosely now. "You went to Janelle." She ran the test. A long silence sat between us, layered with years. He finally set the glass down with care. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, voice even. "But accusations like that don't end well." "No," I said, "they usually don't." I met his eyes and waited. He stared at me unmoving, but something shifted behind them. A calculation. A retreat. Not panic, but strategy. "You've always misunderstood me," he said, his voice softer now, like he was stepping back into the role of the disappointed son. "No," I replied. "I think I finally understand you completely." My hand drifted toward my purse, slow, steady. Not for anything dramatic, just to remind myself I could still reach for something that wasn't fear. As I turned to leave, my eyes scanned the counter behind him. There, half covered by a dish towel, was a small bottle. Clear. Same shape, same size, same type as the one I found in my trash. Ezra saw me notice. He moved just a stretch casual, but enough to obscure it. "I should go," I said. "I've already taken up enough of your time." He stepped aside, letting me pass. "Give Ruth my best," he said, voice light again. I nodded and walked out the door into the cold air. Every nerve in my body was awake, alert. But I didn't run. I didn't even hurry. The phone in my pocket had captured everything. I didn't stop it until I was back in the car, doors locked, engine running. Then I sent the audio file to Detective Reyes before I could change my mind. After that, I didn't drive home. I drove straight to St. Luke's. Ruth was still unconscious. Layal sat beside her, eyes, red hand wrapped around Ruth's limp wrist like it was a lifeline. She stood when she saw me. "Anything she asked?" "Yes," I said. And then I told her. Everything. From the moment the box arrived to the sound of Ezra's voice on the phone. The powder, the test, the visit. The bottle is on the counter. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, she sank into the chair beside Ruth and didn't speak for a full minute. "I should have known," she whispered. "You couldn't have," I said gently. She shook her head. "He's been off, for a while, distant, secretive. I found notes, jars of dried plants I didn't recognize. I thought he was just stressed. I didn't think—" Her voice broke. Turns out Ezra had been posting on herbalist forums for years under a pseudonym. Detailed discussions of dosages, extraction processes, toxicity thresholds. Clinical, cold, academic. Some of the terminology matched exactly what was found in Ruth's blood. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to explain. That night I slept on the couch with the recorder beside me and the hallway light on, just in case. The next morning came with the sound of nothing. No wind, no birdsong, just a dull gray stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. Detective Reyes called just after sunrise. His voice was firm this time, more clipped. We listened to the recording. I didn't breathe. "It's enough," he said. "Combined with the toxicology report, Ruth's symptoms, and the substance in the bottle, we've got what we need." There was a pause on the line. Not hesitation. Respect. "We'll pick him up today." Quietly. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you." He hesitated. "You did the right thing, Ms. Greaves." I wasn't sure if that was comfort or confirmation. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Ezra was arrested just before noon. He didn't resist, didn't scream, didn't cry. He walked with them like it was something scheduled, like he'd already accounted for it in his day planner. The news didn't travel fast. It wasn't plastered on headlines or whispered at grocery stores. It was just something that happened. Quiet, heavy, real. I didn't go to the station. I didn't want to see his face again, not until I could stop hearing his voice in my head. You did what it still echoed. But now it came with an answer. Ruth began waking up the next day, slowly, like a body climbing out of deep water. Her eyes opened without recognition at first, but she squeezed Leia's hand. That was enough. I sat with her when Layal needed rest. We didn't speak much. Ruth didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. One afternoon, I took her hand and whispered, "I'm sorry." She squeezed mine, Just once, as if to say, you didn't know, and now you do. It was a forgiveness I hadn't expected, and one I wasn't sure I deserved. Later that week, Leal came to my house. She stood in the kitchen holding a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes were swollen from a cry she hadn't tried to hide. I should have known, she said for the third time. I shook my head. You loved him. That's not blindness. That's hope. She sniffed. He was researching under fake names, writing about poisons like they were ingredients for soup. He talked about dosage and absorption like he was writing a thesis. She paused, staring at the countertop. He told me once that control is peace. I didn't know what he meant. Now she did. We both did. The following Tuesday, I pulled the cookie out of the fridge. It had dulled. The frosting had lost its shine. But it was still intact, still beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. Detective Reyes had given me a sealed evidence bag. He didn't say I had to use it, just handed it to me when Ezra was taken in case you want to hold on to it. Not for revenge, for clarity. I slid the cookie inside and sealed the bag shut. It made a soft sound, almost like an exhale. It felt heavier than it should have. I took a small fireproof box from the hall closet, the one I used to keep insurance documents and old passports, and cleared it out. Inside, I placed the bagged cookie, and beside it, I added the card from the package. The only thing Ezra had written in 3 years. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. I closed the lid, locked it, not to forget, to remember. Because sometimes clarity isn't a lightning bolt. It's the slow, agonizing process of rearranging all your memories through a new lens and realizing you missed the signs because you were too busy loving the idea of someone who never really existed. That night I stood in the kitchen with the lights off, listening to the house breathe around me. It didn't feel safe yet. Maybe it never would again. But for the first time I knew what had happened. I had names for the shadows. I turned off the last light and walked down the hallway. Not sure if I was walking away from something or toward the part of myself I'd finally begun to reclaim. The house was quieter now, but not in the peaceful way. It was the quiet that settles in after a storm, the kind that leaves things intact on the outside but changed in some way you can't name. I kept walking past the closet that held the fireproof box. Sometimes I'd pause outside it like there was something still waiting to be heard from inside. But the box didn't make a sound. Neither did the card. Neither did the cookie. And Ezra said nothing. He hadn't called. He hadn't written, not a single word since they took him away. And yet, he was everywhere. In the neat folds of my dish towels, in the order of the spice rack, in the way I couldn't open the fridge without remembering that blue ribbon. That's what control does when it lives in a house for too long. It lingers long after the person is gone. People asked quietly what happened. Neighbors mostly. A few old friends who knew the version of Ezra I used to brag about. The valedictorian, the science fair champion, the boy who read everything and needed nothing. I told them Ruth had fallen ill, that it had been a close call. I didn't mention the cookie, or the bottle, or the boy I raised who had turned his precision inward. Because how do you explain something like that? How do you tell someone that your son, your only child, once scrubbed his mouth raw because you baked the wrong cookies, and that now 2 decades later he sent you a version that could have killed you? You don't. You live with it, piece by piece, like a riddle that stopped needing answers and just became part of the furniture. I started therapy. Not because I thought I was breaking, but because I wasn't. And that scared me more. The therapist was young. Too young, I thought at first. But she had kind eyes and didn't fill the silence with pity. She asked about Ezra. I said he was brilliant. She asked, was he kind? I didn't answer. Because the truth is, he could be, when it served him, when it fit his logic. But kindness for the sake of connection, of softness, of empathy. Nombre Ezra didn't traffic in those currencies. She asked if I had seen signs. Always, I said. I just called them something else. The things he never said out loud now rang loudest in my ears. When I forgot his favorite shirt in the laundry, he went to school in silence. When I once put a sticky note in his lunchbox that said, I love you, and it came home unread, untouched, still sealed in the plastic wrap like an accusation. When I hugged him after he won his scholarship and he tensed, not because he didn't want the affection, but because I had done it in front of someone. His silence was a weapon, a scalpel. He used it not to punish, but to train. And I learned how to walk through that house like a museum docent. Quiet, careful, pointing out the highlights, never touching anything that might crack. One afternoon, Leal called. "I filed for legal separation," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. "Not because I'm angry, because I'm tired." I told her I understood. She said Ruth was recovering slowly. Her appetite had returned, but she still got dizzy standing too fast. She hadn't asked about Ezra, just stared out the window with that long, searching look that people get when they've lived through something unspeakable. "She knows," Leal said, "even if no one tells her. I asked if she needed anything." "No," she said, "just thank you. For stopping it. For stopping him." I didn't know how to respond to that, because the truth was, I hadn't stopped him. He had. When he slipped up, when he underestimated me, when he revealed more than he meant to, and I'd simply been watching closely enough for once to see it. That evening, I found something in Ezra's old desk drawer. A paper he'd written in high school, The Ethics of Control. I remembered him winning first place for it. The judge had praised its originality. The thesis argued that control wasn't inherently evil, it was a tool neutral in itself. What mattered was the intent behind its use. He'd written, "To control something is not always to harm it. Sometimes it is the only way to keep chaos out of love." At the time, I'd been proud. I even framed the certificate. Now I read that line and felt my stomach twist. Maybe he hadn't changed. Maybe he'd always believed that. And maybe worst of all, I had let it sound like wisdom. The next day, Detective Reyes called. "There'll be a hearing," he said. "Probably quiet. Plea deals likely. First-time offense. No priors. He's cooperating." I wanted to ask, cooperating with who? What does cooperation mean when the person you harmed is your own mother? But I didn't ask. Instead, I asked if I could retrieve the evidence. The cookie. The bottle. He said yes. He'd cleared it already. When I picked them up, the detective didn't offer condolences. He just handed over the sealed bag and said, "You were brave." I shook my head. "No," I said. I was paying attention. There was no dramatic ending. No trial with cameras, no front-page headline, no family screaming in court, just paperwork. Charges filed, a quiet plea, a court date I wasn't required to attend. Ezra's lawyer submitted psychiatric evaluations. There was talk of underlying conditions and complicated familial history. All I could think was, he sent poison with a ribbon on it, but the system has its own language, and I had said what I needed to say. The night I brought the cookie home for the second time, I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I just stood in the doorway of the kitchen, the sealed evidence bag in my hand, and listened to the hum of the fridge, the same fridge where it had lived for days, wrapped like a gift, hiding its truth under frosting. I opened the fireproof box from the hall closet, placed the cookie inside beside the birthday card, the handwriting still perfect, still Ezra, still precise. "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." And I locked it shut. Not because I needed to protect it, but because I needed to remember. Weeks passed, people stopped asking questions, the world moved on. Ruth got stronger, and Leal moved back in with her mother for a while. She sent me photos sometimes. Ruth in the garden, Ruth reading on the porch, Ruth smiling without needing to explain why she still woke up at 4 a.m. for no reason. As for me, I started going on walks again, down the block, past the old park, past the school Ezra once attended where he had won awards and refused hugs. I said hello to people I hadn't spoken to in years. I baked a pie, from scratch. Not because I wanted to eat it, but because I needed to prove I still could. One morning, I sat on the porch with my crossword and my coffee. The porch swing creaked beneath me, same as it always had. The lawn was still patchy, still defiant. But I didn't feel the need to fix it. Some things resist control for a reason. A neighbor waved, I waved back, and for the first time in what felt like years, I realized I didn't need Ezra to start over. I had done it already, alone, slowly, deliberately, the way healing often happens. I haven't visited him, not because I'm angry, but because I finally stopped trying to explain away what I saw so clearly. The control, the silence, the sharp corners of love are shaped like performance. What he did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And my choice was to live, to stay alive, to stay aware, to trust my instincts even when they felt like betrayal. That's what motherhood is sometimes, not protecting them from the world, but protecting the world from what they become. I don't know if he'll ever apologize. I don't know if he thinks he did anything wrong. That cookie, the one I didn't eat, is still inside a fireproof box, right beside the birthday card that said, "Happy birthday, Mom." Let's start over. We never did, but maybe starting over doesn't mean going back. Maybe it means stopping. It means realizing not every gift is an act of love, not every relationship deserves repair, and not all blood ties are worth bleeding for. I didn't eat that cookie. And maybe that didn't just save my life. Maybe it saved the part of me that still thought I had to swallow pain just because it came from family. What about you? Have you ever received a gift that still chills you just thinking about it? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading. If this story touched you, please hit like and subscribe to follow our journey through stories of family healing and the path to finding yourself again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that sometimes surviving is the most honest form of resistance.